Thanks. 24 minutes after the hour, President Obama pushing a ban on solitary confinement for juveniles and low-level offenders in federal prisons. In a Washington Post op-ed, the president said he came to his decision after the Justice Department found that the practice reduces the chances that prisoners can be rehabilitated into society. But is prison about rehabilitation or punishment? Joining us now for a legal debate, attorney Eric Guster and former federal attorney Emily Campagno. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Eric, what happens to someone who's in prison? They go to solitary confinement, particularly a young individual.
They're put into this tiny, tiny cell. And what happens, these people go through emotional turmoil, being stuck in a tiny cell with no contact with human life, no ability to talk to other people. They are caged like animals, which is really cruel and unusual punishment. And the president is making the right step in making this change.
So you are for the ban. Emily, you are against it. Why?
Eric makes fair points, but it's impossible to separate the detrimental effects of solitary confinement from the whole host of other detrimental effects that being in prison does, especially for these juveniles. The purpose of prison is punishment and deterrence. It is not rehabilitation, especially at Rikers, for example, when last year alone, $22,000 worth of drugs and alcohol were smuggled in by the guards. Rampant inmate-on-inmate violence, rampant guard-on-inmate violence.
But isn't that a different issue, Emily? Isn't that a different issue, Emily? Eric, I mean, what do you think, Eric?
Prison is about rehabilitation, especially with juvenile offenders, because what we want to do is we want to punish people, but we want to rehabilitate them into making them be ready for life after prison. Because we have this issue with recidivism and people reoffending, so we want to make sure they're prepared emotionally as well as spiritually to go back in society without reoffending.
Emily, one of the instances that President Obama talks about in his Washington Post op-ed is this individual, Khalif Browder. He spent nearly 2 years in solitary confinement there at Rikers, the place where you were speaking of. He awaited trial simply for stealing a backpack, was released in 2013, but then committed suicide at the age of 22. However, you say this is an unfair example. Why?
Khalif Browder is an undeniably tragic example, obviously. But again, that goes to my point of separating the ill effects of the solitary confinement alone. So my point earlier about citing all those other examples of the toxicity of the system is that he was the victim of incredible inmate violence as well as guard violence, and he cited it repeatedly in terms of his emotional subsequent state post-incarceration. So my point is all of those have a detrimental aspect, and Obama himself acknowledged that solitary confinement is often necessary, albeit a drastic measure.
Yeah, for their own personal safety from time to time, isn't it, Eric?
Exactly.
And sometimes the personal safety is an issue. However, when you're putting people in solitary confinement for up to a year, so at times when someone is put into solitary for 365 days, that is beyond the realm of regular punishment. That is cruel and unusual, and the president is trying to put a stop to it, and we should.
Well, approximately 24 states over the last couple of years have tried to curtail the use of solitary confinement for many of the reasons that President Obama mentioned. Eric and Emily, thank you so much for your time today. And friends at home, email us, friends@foxnews.com. What do you think about juveniles in solitary confinement? 28 minutes after the